Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Lauren Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back, and this week I am joined with Rick. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
We've literally done over 100 podcasts, and I still can't do a good intro. One day, I will be able to do a good intro, but for now, it's not going to happen. So, today's podcast, I'm really excited about this because it's something that I've looked more into, and I've just become really interested just with like the world that we live in, and especially like current, like 2020, this is like super relevant, and it's all about behavioral addictions. So there's so many that we can talk about, but they're all kind of together. And I think that what's different about behavioral addictions, or what's not different about them, is that how they are so similar to what most people would classify as regular, air quotes, addictions, right? Like, people are like, oh, okay, you have a drug problem, or like you have a drinking problem, but they're like, you have a social media problem, like, relax. It's like, no, it physiologically, it's very different, obviously, like with the substances, but behaviorally, it's very similar. So,
yeah,
take it away.
I think you're right on. The overwhelming tendency, I think, is for some people to minimize and downplay and rationalize the differences between chemical dependency versus a behavioral addiction. Some of my favorite things to do when I'm working with addicts is we kind of go through this game where one person says, well, I have a problem with marijuana, not with alcohol, right? And the other person's like, well, I have a problem with cocaine, but not methamphetamines. Well, I have a problem with meth, but it's not heroin. And so it's this paradigm that everybody tries to create to justify their own actions. And when you look at behavioral addictions, they follow the same patterns as a chemical addiction. And so understanding addiction overall is important for understanding behavioral addictions or chemical addictions. And so there's a lot of different ways to kind of define addiction. If we were to look at the DSM, excuse me, or more of a clinical definition that a lot of people would prescribe to, they would say that it is a substance, it's a person or an activity that is designed to help you escape in some way, shape, or form. Escape outside of oneself, that kind of emotional pain that comes with it, and it has continued use despite negative consequences. So when you look at it in a broad definition like that, you can be talking about anything. And I think that's what's important, is it's not about necessarily pinpointing select behaviors or select substances that are the problem. It's about identifying what is the behavior that I'm doing and how is it affecting me negatively, and how is it affecting my life and all the other aspects of my life. And so I guess one of the things that I really want people to understand is whether you're having a problem because you're addicted to your cell phone, or you're addicted to social media, or you're addicted to video games, it's no different than being addicted to alcohol or narcotics or any other illicit substance. Oftentimes the motivating factors behind them are the same. You might look at it and be like, yeah, well, I'm not strung out, or I'm not, as desperate as somebody who needs a drink every single day, and that's your way of rationalizing it, and that's kind of what we want to get into.
And I noticed this, just in general, obviously, being somebody who has to be on my phone a lot, being somebody who has to be on social media, and just screens in general. And even though I've looked into this and I recognize it and I understand, I know, it's still so hard, and you go and you just grab your phone and you scroll and you do these things, and without even really wanting to, it's not like I'm like, oh my gosh, I really want to spend 20 minutes right now doing this, you know what I mean? It literally just happens.
In a sense, it's been prescribed for you as a mandate for your job. And this is, I give a lecture twice a year to a group of doctoral students who are getting their doctorate in physical therapy. So they bring me in and I do an entire lecture on substance use. And one of the first things I try and get people to understand is that the way society and the way films and the way books and the way media have depicted addiction is there's this level of desperation that comes with it. And the reality is, for many people, addiction's not a choice. The clinical model still follows the disease model, which in some regards it is. But it's not that it's a choice, it's not a moral failing, it's not an ethical issue. And with the doctoral students in the rehabilitation program, I want them to understand that a lot of the people who are going to become addicted, they didn't choose that. They were prescribed pain medications after a painful surgery or an experience in their life. And as a result of somebody starting a business, it's kind of like, well, it's in a sense been prescribed for you. You have to be on your phone because your business is online. So it's easy for you to blur the lines and to fall deeper into an addictive cycle because you're thinking, well, this is part of my job and I have to do this. And in fact, for you, it might even be more difficult because the line between, am I doing this because I'm bored? Or am I doing this because this is actually part of my job, can become very difficult to distinguish between the two.
It's almost impossible because in order to, social media is so fucked up in the way that it works and the way, like what they reward, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what they do with the video games too, which is so creepy. But also, I mean, it makes sense, like why would you not do that, right? Like they test little things, like what does somebody like this or that more? And then they just test it, and whatever they spend longer playing, like, okay, we push that one forward, you know what I mean? And like you're basically creating the most addictive things possible. And that's the way that, you know, social media works, because especially with the algorithms, which most all social media platforms utilize now, the more that you interact and the longer that you're on there, the more that they reward you. So it's so awful, you know what I mean? But like, and I understand why they do it, like it's a business, like I get it. They're making money off of it, but it's also like, it's really hard because as somebody who does have an online business, like if you want to be successful, you have to somehow play into that. But then it's like, where are you kind of like you said, drawing that line? And it really is hard because if you're not on it, like if I just go on my phone once a day for Instagram, that is significantly less impactful per Instagram standards than if I go on multiple times a day.
Yes.
And I share multiple things and I like multiple things and I comment on multiple things and I comment back to people. Like it's literally that entrenched. Like
it's rewarding you.
Yeah.
And that's what addiction is.
And I don't even want that, but it's rewarding me, which obviously rewards me on the back end. Like if I get more clients, like that is rewarding. You know what I mean? So
in fact, you will tell yourself, the more I'm online, the better it is for me.
Yeah.
Which is horrible when you think about it from an addictive perspective. It's designed. And so I gave you the clinical version of what is and what people would look at when they're talking about addiction. But the reality is, to me, and this is where it almost gets a little bit more philosophical, but still maintains its clinical piece, is that addiction at its root cause is a response to human suffering. And so whether we're looking at it in terms of, let's talk about the typical behaviors, right? Let's just kind of run down a list. Gambling, sex, internet. The internet could be your phone, social media, or video games, shopping, addiction to plastic surgery, food. How many times have you dealt with that throughout your career? It's like a constant daily thing. You know, risky behaviors that people display, rock climbing, skydiving, race car driving. These are all behaviors that are designed to help a person escape. And for many people, what they don't realize is the result, or this is the end result of something that has happened earlier in their life. And it's an outlet, it's a way to escape whatever emotional pain is happening in your life. And this is the part where it becomes very easy to distance yourself from that concept when we're talking about a phone or a video game. People are okay accepting that kind of premise when we're talking about drug addiction. When we're talking about somebody who's addicted to heroin or methamphetamines or alcohol, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm just checking my phone. I'm just coming home and playing video games for 6 hours. That's not because I have some level of emotional pain. And it's like, you're 40, you know, and you're playing video games for 5 hours a day. Like, I think there's a little bit more to it.
Yeah.
So.
And even, oh my God, you know when you have a thought and then
and it leaves?
Fuck, this was such a good, exercise. So just like, you know, obviously food, like exercise is an amazing thing, but there's literally people who are addicted to either exercising or they're addicted to tracking their exercise or just tracking things in general. So right, like, and it's the same thing. You could be like, hey, like I think this is kind of a problem, and the person's like, no, I'm healthy, I'm exercising all the time. You're like, whoa, okay, I understand that this is a healthy behavior, but in certain contexts, right? Like now, are most people addicted to exercise? Obviously not, but it can still be just as damaging to those people. And it's like, more is usually not better, and even if it is something that is healthy, that's a great example of that. Like I know people who literally are like it's so addicted to certain types of activity, or like very neurotic ways of doing their activity, and it's like, all right, like this is clearly like presenting itself for another issue.
Right.
Even though this is good. I understand that you're not getting blackout drunk every night, but you can't stop running, or you can't stop walking, or you literally have to lift 6 days a week for 120 minutes, or whatever it is, you know, like.
Yeah, one of the things that sometimes will happen throughout the therapeutic process is a person will come in, and you'll hear it called a number of different things, but sublimation is one that works. And what that essentially refers to is a person will take an unhealthy response that they have. Like I'll use myself for an example. Early in my life, I realized I was an aggressive person, that I had just aggression that needed to get out, and the best way for me to get it out was physically. Well, if I take that level of aggression and I beat people up at school, or I'm constantly getting in fights, it causes problems. So we need to find a way to take that energy or that driving force and put it into something that's socially acceptable. Somehow I found martial arts, so that's where boxing came in, that's where kickboxing comes in. It's what jiu-jitsu provides for me now. Jiu-jitsu more or less, even though now that I'm an older, more mature adult, I'm less aggressive, and what it does is it provides a level of balance for me. And so what happens is people can take something that is naturally healthy and positive, and because there's no balance to it, they take it and it's skewed to such a degree. And anything, when you look at it in terms of extremes, is generally harmful to a person. Is working out bad? No, but too much working out is bad. Is eating McDonald's bad? No, but if you eat it too much, it is. And so it's all about balancing those extremes. It's about understanding what purpose this serves, and how are you using this to escape or avoid dealing with something else. And there's usually some level of pain when we see it in people who are taking it to extremes. Now, what that pain is, this is the part where we want to not judge it. Because if I judge your pain, it minimizes it and it takes it away. And what's painful to you may not be painful to somebody else. And so it doesn't really matter, because the reaction is there. So whether I think it's painful or not, it's painful to you, and it matters. And that's what I want people to get at, is forget judging it. Forget trying to be like, well, that's not anything I should feel shame about. That's not anything I should feel hurt about. The point is you do. So if we can stop like putting it in these masculine terms, or trying to define it as, yes, this is justifiable and this isn't, the reaction is there. And if you're having these symptoms, if these problems are existing in your life, then it needs to be addressed, or hopefully it's addressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I can only just imagine how much worse this is right now with so many places. Like, we're super lucky here, but so many places are super shut down, you know, and I know people who literally still like barely have a social life. They haven't really, you know, gone anywhere, done anything. And so what are people doing? They're watching TV, they're playing video games, they're on their fucking phone all day. Especially now that a lot of people are working from home, that's a really blurry line for a lot of people. Like, you know how we talked about like me being on social media is blurry. Being at home, like working from home, is really, really hard for a lot of people. Like, especially if they're used to being out of their house to work, they leave, they shut down their computer, they drive home, now they're home. But for a lot of people that are at home, they're either super distracted during the day because now they're on their devices and they're trying to work, or they're just working like more because there really is no like actual shutdown period because well, the lights stay on here all the time and I can work, you know what I mean? And I just feel like there's right now, I feel like we're going to see in the next like year or so like just so many issues from this, because and now I do think that there is a subset of people who are like really excited to embrace human interaction again. You know what I mean? Like, I'm hoping that like for some people this makes them realize like, wow, like all of this like virtual stuff like, isn't as great as I thought it was. Like, I really do need human interaction. But I think for a lot of people who were already maybe struggling with that, or they were already struggling socially, or they're just really naturally introverted, whatever it is, maybe they just kind of fall deeper into that. So I'm really, really hoping that like it's not worse, but I have a feeling that
it will.
Yeah.
I mean, the environmental factors that have created this have created what would normally be signs and symptoms of depression, right? When you talk about isolation, when you talk about withdrawal, when you talk about not participating in activities that you once have found pleasurable, society and the environment that we live in right now has created those conditions. It's not even that you've pulled away, right? Normally we can look at it and be like, well, the environment hasn't changed, so now you're pulling away from those things. You're not going to the gym, you're not interacting with friends. Well, society and the environment has kind of dictated those terms. So it's essentially provided a breeding ground for depression. And it's created an opportunity for more emotional suffering, more human suffering. And I think sometimes a better way to look at addiction or these types of problems that occur, cell phone addiction, video games, whatever, is that you're attempting to escape some level of suffering. And in doing that, what ends up happening is whatever that suffering is, the cell phone, the video games is a way of coping, and it's a dysfunctional way of coping. And so whether it's substances that you're turning to, or you're turning to sex, or you're turning to shopping, or you're turning to plastic surgery, you're using those things as a way to escape whatever emotional suffering you have, and the way that you've chosen to do it is in a dysfunctional way. And what makes it even more difficult is when people take a healthy response like working out, and then they take it to such an extreme, it kind of covers it up even an extra step. Like, I don't know why you're arguing with me. Like, I'm healthy, I'm at the gym every single day. You should love the fact that I have a great body or that I'm keeping myself healthy. And so we can justify it and embed it ourselves even deeper into that process. And we don't realize that this behavior is a developed coping mechanism for something else. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are missing from it. Even with your cell phones, even with your video games. If you're coming home as a 30-year-old man and you're playing video games for several hours a day, what are you hiding from? Like, there's something that's driving that. And for some people, if they don't see it as a problem, then they never walk into my office. And I'm not here to say you have a problem with it, because if that's the way you want to spend your life, and you can't look at it under any of those other scopes and see that biopsychosocial kind of component that we've talked about, the physical, the social, the relational, the financial, if it's not affecting any of those areas, it's not a problem for you, then you'll never come into my office and seek help for it. So I'm not judging you for it. I'm just saying 5 hours a day doing anything is pretty extreme.
Yeah, and that's where you have to look at, like, is this harmful, like, in a way that's not necessarily like obviously playing video games is not harmful to the actual person. Mm-hmm. Well, it could be, I guess, but like, what else is not getting done now in those 5 hours? You know what I mean? Like, exactly. Every once in a while, like, sure. Does everybody have like a day where they just like lounge around or they do nothing? Like, yes, like, we all need those days. Sure. That's not what anybody's suggesting. But it's like, all right, if you do that every day or like more days than not, like, what are you not doing in those hours that could actually be productive and like move you forward or move, you know, your household or your family, like literally anything else.
Right.
But if everything's getting taken care of, I guess, then okay, cool, do it. But most likely, it's not.
Well, and that's what drives them into see me. Because it's kind of like, all right, something has created problems in their life and they're there. And so I kind of break out that chart and I'm like, well, tell me about, it's not just, let's just talk about the video game addiction. Tell me about your relationships. Tell me about the relationship with your wife or your husband. Tell me about the relationships you have with your kids and your coworkers. Tell me about work while we're on that subject. How are you performing at work? You know, what's your social life like? What are you doing with your friends and your family? And what we begin to see is there's patterns that start to emerge. And you might be great in one category, but when you get to another, like talk about video games and physical health. Well, if you're playing video games for 5 hours, chances are you're not working out. Are you gaining weight? Are you unhappy? And if you're gaining weight, that also lends itself to more depression. You're more prone to anxiety at those, because you're not giving your body the natural release that it needs. And more importantly, what you're also doing is with cell phones, in general, they're designed neurochemically the same way gambling is designed to create dopamine responses in the brain, which are the same neurochemicals that are released that make us feel good. When you eat a cheeseburger, dopamine. When you have sex, dopamine. When you look at your phone, which is literally designed to grab your attention. It has, I wrote some down, like texts, notifications, sounds, images.
Even the colors.
The colors, like, right? It's designed to grab you and pull you in. And so you can't escape it. It's kind of like, I used to call it the Sam Malone theory. Most people don't know who Sam Malone is. It was a sitcom called Cheers. Oh. And the lead character was a recovering alcoholic who owned a bar, mm-hmm. right? And so he placed himself in like the most stressful environment as a bartender and the owner of a bar who didn't drink. That doesn't work for most people. Most people, when it comes to addiction, they have to learn to create boundaries. And with substances, you can learn to live without it. There are some things, like video games, you can learn to live without video games. You can learn to live without a cell phone. There are people who still have old school cell phones. The only one that I would make an argument that you need to learn how to cope with it is if you have a sexual addiction, right? Now you have to, like, you're not going to cut sex out of your life. So you need to learn to work to incorporate healthy boundaries around that. But just about everything else, you don't really need it in your life. And so you're kind of drawn to it. And your phone is essentially like taking an alcoholic and making him work in a bar. It's there, it's constant.
Yeah.
It's constantly drawing your attention to it. And so if it's not a sound, it's an image. If it's not an image, it's a color. It's something that is designed to grab your attention and draw you back into it. It's no different than pouring a drink and setting it right in front of an alcoholic and saying, don't drink that. Well, like, you know, pretty soon you're going to see them scratching their face and crawling the walls every time it like lights up. You know, go watch what's the documentary, The Social Dilemma?
I haven't seen it,
Oh.
but I heard it was good.
It'll terrify you.
Yeah, I'm like, I probably don't want to watch this.
Yeah.
Even like, there's like this stupid language app that I use, and after like looking into more of this stuff, I notice all these little things, like when something is good, it makes a certain sound.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, like the little like animated characters like move. There's like dings, and the way that everything is positioned, like the colors, like it's all, and if you do it wrong, it has a different response, you know what I mean? And I'm like going through it and like, I'm like, oh my God. And obviously at some point there has to be a stopping, internal mechanism. Like I'm getting this wrong because I've been doing this for too long. So like it's stimulating enough that like I can't do it for too long, right? I can't be addicted to my German app. Like, hey, I would learn German by now, but so like there is like a stopping mechanism because it's like, all right, I got these wrong. Like I need to exit out of this. But if it wasn't like a learning like app, right? If this was like a game app or like one of those like stupid fucking things, like I've never played a phone game, but apparently they're really addicting. And I understand why, because like all of this stuff, like you don't like, and it doesn't shut off either. You know, stuff that doesn't end is what's really hard for us, because literally you could, for a game or for like social media, like you can just keep on scrolling. There's millions of things, and
it's
like if
endless.
you don't stop, like you just look up, like how many people have just looked up and been like, oh my God, what did I just do for this amount of time? And because it's so stimulating, you like, and that's what's weird about it, because it feels so unfulfilling, but you feel like you can't stop either, which I guess is part of addiction. But
it is unfulfilling. And one of the things that I will ask people to do, and even the people who are listening to this right now thinking like, well, I'm not addicted. Fine. You're not addicted.
Cool.
What I will say is pay attention to how you feel when you're putting your phone down. And has this process, however long you spent on it, whether it was 2 minutes or 2 hours, right? Because it's very easy to like fall into that wormhole and just start scrolling through stuff and reading things, and it takes you in all these crazy different directions. But how do you feel after you just got done using it? Like, do you honestly feel happier? Do you feel more relaxed? Are you calmer? Are you more at peace? Did this actually make your life better in some way, shape, or form? And the reality is it doesn't for a lot of people, because it is an empty process. It literally gives you nothing back. Instagram, 99% of it is crap. You don't get anything out of it. What do you get from Instagram? You get you talking about, hey, I just posted a new podcast. Well, the podcast is where they're going to get their information from, right? And so there's the link for it, so people are going to go and they're going to listen to it. Otherwise, what is every video? Every video is 1 minute, 2 minutes, like, hey, check this out, here's a link to this. It's not Instagram that's providing that. That's the content that you created that people are actually seeking out and finding in other places. And you're giving them little bits of stuff to say, hey.
You can create really short content, but that's not.
But who's going to watch the long content?
On there? Yeah, no.
No, it's designed for like immediacy and quick, and keep scrolling and move on, and it creates inattention, and it creates agitation, and it creates irritability, and people wonder why they're as depressed. It's also replacing your sense of yourself and your identity. You know, people aren't now judge their worth based off of the amount of likes that they get or the amount of activity that a post gets. We were having this conversation earlier. I know, especially with teenagers, and adults do this too. They won't admit it, but they do it. They post a picture with the expectation of how many likes that they're going to get or the activity that they're going to draw from it. So what does that tell us? They're not actually sharing anything with the world that they find valuable. They're trying to share with the world things that the rest of the world finds valuable, which now determines my worth. If this doesn't get 200 or 300 or 400 likes, I'm going to take it down. And so what's that saying about me? This isn't a way that I'm using to express myself or share myself with the world. I'm using this as a way for the world to validate me as a person. And that's a really dangerous process. And it's an empty one because it'll never be enough. Especially,
it's super dangerous for something like Instagram that is rewarded for different things. Because, and I mean, I even fall into this too. Like, you look at stuff and you're like, not just Instagram, but any kind of social media, most of the time the stuff that is the most popular, not always, but mostly, is not what I would consider worthy of being popular, right? Like, putting it in a very, like, PC way, right? Like, it's just not. And then you see that and you're like, well, fuck, why am I spending all this time doing this? And then you either have two responses. You're like, you either see that and you get discouraged and then you just don't post at all, or you keep trying like even harder to fill some kind of whatever, like, oh, if I post a picture like this girl, that's what those likes got, or like this guy did this video, like maybe I should do this. And you know, you try to, so there's either two responses, like you just stop, you just shut down, or you try harder. But the problem with something like an Instagram or any kind of social media that is run by an algorithm is that it will never be enough, because it's always going to change, and the algorithm always changes. And the people who used to have the most popular pages, literally in a blink of an eye, it can be just gone. Not even like, not the page is gone, but like the activity is gone. And if anybody doesn't believe me, like that is how that works. You know what I mean? That all that stuff is very, very true. Like censorship is incredibly pervasive in social media. It's awful. But it's obvious, you know what I mean? And like, you can even just go through people's stuff and you see like somebody who has, you know, let's say a decent or a large following, even if they don't, who cares? It doesn't matter what the following is. If you go through and you can see like, okay, this normally gets X, and then you can look at another post that looks pretty similar and it's literally like a tenth of it. For what? Like, they were arguably similar topics, similar photos, similar whatever. And it's like, it just, but if you were like, oh my God, like my last video got 100 comments, this one got 5. Like, am I a bad person? Like, am I giving up? And because how else would you judge it? Because that is literally the judging mechanism that they've given you.
Yes.
So it's so hard to like put stuff out when you feel like nobody's like integrating it. You're like, well then why the fuck would I do this?
Exactly.
Or I'll just make an OnlyFans. Just kidding, guys. I'm not doing that. I mean, I don't judge you if you do. Get that money. But I mean, just saying. There's other ways. But
yeah, so essentially what you just described is the same kind of process that childhood trauma takes. And that's kind of the emotional pain that comes with the stuff. So when we're traumatized as children, it affects the way we feel about ourselves, right? So whatever the experience is, it impacts the way I feel about myself, which is oftentimes rooted in deep shame. And when children experience that type of, when they have those types of experiences, they internalize it, because children are very egocentric. Everything is about them. And so when a child is abused, they oftentimes will blame themselves. They'll think it's their fault. If a person's sexually abused, they'll say, well, I clearly allowed this, why wasn't I stronger? I'm a weak person. And so they internalize these things about themselves. And this is what creates deep feelings of shame, deep feelings of abandonment. And so not only are they dealing with the trauma from the experiences that has, but when you live in traumatic relationships that create abuse, that create neglect, there's a sense of development of an intense emotional pain that comes with it, that's carried throughout that person's life. And when that pain exists, the way they choose to soothe it is by creating and finding out these compulsive behaviors. And so, believe it or not, when we are talking about video games and we're talking about cell phones, we're talking about that. We're talking about the trauma that occurred. We're talking about those early childhood experiences. And it's all connected. Most mental health disorders are rooted in childhood experiences. And whatever your compulsive behavior is right now, especially if it's being taken to a degree that's dangerous, that's unhealthy, that's deteriorating parts of your life, there's a cause for that. We want to get at that cause. So,
another thing I read in a book that was kind of talking about it's called Digital Minimalism. I've talked about it before on here. And the one thing that he was talking about is how basically leisure time has been replaced with sitting down and scrolling on your phone or watching something just very passive. or playing a video game, or on a shopping app, whatever it might be, right? Instead of physically doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there actually is some research with that. And now, again, not saying that you have to be physically active 24/7, because that could be an issue too, right? We've just talked about that. But people thinking man, I've had a really hard day, I just want to relax. He's people will then get on their phone for an hour, and he's do you feel any more relaxed? Do you feel any better? No, you generally feel worse,
anxious,
and you're likely wound up to some extent, you know what I mean? Whereas if you would have taken that time to, go do build something, or go to the gym, or go to a class, whatever
mm-hmm.
it might be, you likely will actually feel a lot better. And even though you thought you needed to have this leisure time, which meant do nothing, it actually was unhelpful, and then you want to be less productive moving forward. I've noticed that too. There's so many times I'm you know what, I've just done so many things, I just need to sit here and do nothing, right? And sometimes you do, sometimes you just need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the phone is generally not the way to do that. I have found that can just be awful. Watching something that's okay, I'm either gonna watch a episode of this,
mm-hmm.
or I'm gonna watch a movie, put an end to it, that generally is helpful. But if you're just yeah, I'll just scroll my phone because I'm so tired right now. No, none of that is useful. None of that is helpful. And I wonder if that's how a lot of this starts, because nobody's I really want to get addicted to my cell phone today.
Mm-hmm.
No, nobody wanted to do, you said, nobody was choosing really to do this. You don't pick up a video game to hope that you don't leave your house for 3 weeks and just, eat Cheetos and drink soda. Nobody's
mm-hmm.
hoping that happens to them. So I think it's all right, well, how did this occur?
That's where it's not a choice.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about, very early when we were defining it. How is it created in somebody? No one wakes up and says, I want to be an addict today. It's a byproduct of doing something. So you're exposed to it, oftentimes recreationally, right? You go to your friend's house and it's just the first time they have a video game system. Or you go to somebody's place and, it's the first time they offer you a drink. And so the idea of it is your first time using something, it's recreational. But then what we begin to see is it takes kind of this gradual process, and it moves from recreational, and it takes the space to where now it's more used occasionally and for relief, right? And so that's kind of the next step. And then what we see is there's an increase in cravings, right? Where now we're actively thinking about it. And this is where we begin to really see it take more of a habit, where it becomes habitual in the sense that you're starting to use it on a more regular and consistent basis. And this is also, with cell phones, it's the dopamine dump. And so you get instant rewards. If I'm having a shitty day, all I have to do is post a picture of myself and I get 100 likes. You get 14 comments that come with it, hey, great picture, you look great, fantastic. And all of a sudden you feel great about yourself, right? From your 1,000 followers or whatever it is. And there's the response. Now suddenly you feel better about yourself, but you didn't actually do anything. You weren't addressing any of these issues, and all you did was kind of feed into the addiction. And if it's a video game, you allow yourself to escape. If it's something else, whatever the behavior is, you're slipping into it to avoid dealing with something else. And when we start to see the increases in triggers, everything at this point, so it's taken this natural progression, and now everything can be used as an excuse to use. Let me give you an example. This is one that people can really relate to. Okay, so you're taking a test and you get an A, right? And you've aced that final. You're what to do now? Time to what?
Go drink.
Time to party, right? You're gonna go out and you're gonna celebrate, aren't you? Now, you take that same test and you fail. What's the response? Oh shit, time to drink, right? Same test, same two completely different reactions to it on opposite ends, A or fail, and you're still gonna drink? How does that work? How do we justify that? And it's the same thing when it comes to video games. Hey, I did awesome. Today was a great day at work. I'm going to reward myself with 4 hours of Call of Duty, where you're blowing up 14-year-olds. And that makes you feel good. You've used it as a reward system for yourself. Or you're having a crappy day. So you escape into the video game. It becomes your outlet. Oh man, I had a bad day. I just want to go home and watch TV for 5 hours. TV is no different than playing a video game. You're just using it to escape. You're not dealing with it. You're not doing anything constructive. And what is happening is we're losing the ability to process, and we're losing the ability to form deep and meaningful relationships. And I don't just mean with other people. I mean with you as an individual. A lot of times people will turn to a therapist and they're I need help. I want to get better. And as a therapist, one of my goals is to say, well, how can I help support you? What will make you a happier person? I can give them certain tools, but I want to create the autonomy in them to realize that this is your burden, right? And you created the issue, or the issue has been created in your life. You also hold the keys for it. And so I need people to start connecting with themselves and doing things that provide meaning and value and purpose in their life. And social media and your cell phone is designed to pull those things away. And so you have to be able to recognize that paradigm shift in order to address it effectively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and that, I mean, the meaningful relationship with yourself, I think, is obviously the cornerstone to any other meaningful relationships, right? Like, you can't have a good relationship with really anybody else unless you've taken care of that. I mean, obviously you can be like this fake version of yourself to other people, but at some point, like, it's all going to come crumbling, it's all going to like crash down. So you need to figure that shit out. And certainly the, you know, easy behavioral addictions that are just kind of written off are really, I think, just a lot more harmful, because you know, you're not going to have as many physiological issues, but it's going to be very impactful psychologically and to all the relationships in your life. So, you know, because it's not like, man, I really like this drinking problem that I've had, like, you know, I got my blood work back and, you know, this is happening. Or like, wow, I really have all these health issues now because of my drug addiction. Like, that is kind of like a, you know, a punch in the face to people, and they're like, all right, I'm going to wake up from this. But when do you wake up from a video game addiction? When your wife leaves you and you no longer, you know, have any friends and you lost your job, like, you know, like it's just, usually it doesn't get that extreme. Like it might, like that's like the most extreme end, but like people can go through very mindlessly, like having a seemingly normal life and be chronically addicted to their cell phone, or the validation of social media, or a fucking stupid candy game, or whatever the fuck, you know, was that really popular game on their phone, like, you know what I'm saying, like, and you have no idea, you know, and then it's easy to just write that off. So I think, like you said, people don't want to process things or deal with things, which is why substance addictions, you know, are a thing as well. But I think that this is even more pervasive because it's all the time, and it's socially, you know, it's not really socially acceptable to drink at 9 a.m. I mean, people do it who are alcoholics, but most people are going to be like, yeah, I'm going to celebrate a test, or I'm going to go out, or it's Friday, or whatever, right? Like, okay.
Well, and
but you can pick up your phone at any time of the day, and nobody's questioning that.
Exactly
because,
right.
oh, I'm texting, I'm doing an email, I'm looking, oh, I got to check this. The news is on here, fucking YouTube video. No, like, put it down.
Yep.
So what do you think is a way, because like I said, pretty much, you know, obviously people are going to, you know, people want these in their life. And I think the one important thing about this is not to, you know, for people to hear this, or to hear anybody who talks about this stuff to be like, well, we can't get rid of that. No shit. Like, we're not saying, you know, you need to, I'm not gonna be able to get rid of my cell phone. I'm not gonna be able to get rid of social media. I'm not gonna be able to get rid of all of these things. So like, what is a good way, I guess, to manage it or set boundaries, or, and I know that's gonna look different for every addiction, but like, what would be some just the first step to like understanding, okay, this is like a boundary I need to set, like, how would somebody go about doing that?
Well, the first step is admitting, number one, that it's become a problem, right? And this is why I don't call people addicts. I refuse to do that, because the term addict has such a negative stereotype to it that everybody automatically assumes, like, in their mind they picture like the crack whore walking down the street who's homeless and like got scabies and all kinds of, you know, horrible things. And so there's such a negative perception of that. I don't. What I will do is ask and get the client to get to the space where they can say, like, yes, this is a problem. And so it's kind of like when we're talking about the stages of change. If a client is coming to me in that pre-contemplation stage where they're unwilling to admit that there's a problem and they're not going to do anything to change, well, then why are you in my office, right? If I can at least get them into that contemplation stage of change, that second stage where they're saying, like, look, this is a problem, I'm just unsure, or maybe I don't know how to change, now we can start to talk. We can start to talk about not just what the behavior is and what the symptoms are, but are you willing to address the trauma? Are you willing to address the emotional deficiency? Are you willing to address these other gaps that are in your life that you have used this as a way to escape from? Okay, and video game addiction or cell phone addiction follows that same pattern. If you're bored, boredom is a problem. And so what are we going to do? So we can begin to strategize around that as long as we're willing to address some of these other issues. Because it's not just, how do I set better boundaries with my cell phone? Fine, you could probably provide a better tutorial on that than I can. Apps have, don't they have like parental guidelines where you can put like, I want to use Instagram for 15 minutes a day and 15 minutes only, and after that it won't allow me to access it. Fine, You could delete the app. You could do a lot of different things. So you can set your own boundaries for it. But the reality is, if you're not addressing what the initial driving force is that's creating it, you're going to find a different avenue. If it's not Instagram, you're going to pick up Facebook. If it's not Facebook, you're going to pick up Twitter. If it's not Twitter, you're going to find video games. If it's not video games, you might find something else. If it's the internet, you'll find chat rooms, if people still exist in those. I don't know.
Reddit.
Yeah. You'll just go down that rabbit hole and you'll find other ways.
Please don't get addicted to Reddit, guys.
So, first and foremost, be willing to admit, and can you admit that it's become a problem in your life, and what are the ways that it's affecting you? So it's not just treating the symptoms of it. It's not just saying, I have this problem, and how do I set better boundaries with it? Am I willing to admit that there are other deeper rooted issues that are causing it? What am I trying to escape from? And how are the different ways that I'll have to change my life to avoid feeling the pull to this? And then it might involve enriching your own life, and it might involve joining new activities or finding out where those deficiencies exist and addressing that. And so for me as a therapist, that's kind of like the best case scenario when I can get a client who's willing to address those parts. And be ready to answer the question for yourself. What will make you happier? You have to evaluate yourself. And sometimes that's what therapy does, is it provides the opportunity to explore that. And once you realize, yeah, I'm unhappy and these are some of the areas why, well, now you can create a path to resolving those issues, or at least attempting to address them. Make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that was a really good way to end it. So I think that's all for behavioral addictions. And if you guys do need therapy or want to reach out for mental health consulting, that's what we call it, you can go to the show notes, and that is where you can find Rick's email. And it's too long to say over the talking part. And yeah, that's it for now. And then next episode I'm really excited about too, because it's something that ties into this, but it's slightly different, but I think that it really goes together. So that'll be out on Wednesday, and we will catch you guys next time.